There's Branislava, who made the red rosary. She's now with her daughter in Spartan Soda Spears. I was arrested in 1948. It was July 13th, the feast of St. Anton. My older sister's husband was Anton, that is. He celebrated his name day. Two of his brothers came as well as two neighbors, and I would of course help my sister and spent the night. At 4 o'clock in the morning they came, which often was the case, come in the middle of the night. Lots of soldiers surrounded the house. They woke everyone up, performed a thorough search, ransacking everything. They shook everything. One came out and said, "Here, I found it. I found anti-Soviet proclamations. Is it yours?" "No, it's not mine." So it was a plant. That's oftentimes was the case. Of course, they threw their papers around, and it goes on. My interrogation went like this. I was held there locally for 4 days. I was beaten and flogged terribly. From there, having been flogged so I could not walk, I was taken to the city where further interrogation was carried out. But I had been so severely beaten that they could not conduct the interrogation right away. My insides had been pummeled and crushed. Everything was fractured. I'd been thrown on the ground. 3 or 4 people would stomp on me with their feet. They had to summon the military doctor. There in the office, I was completely undressed and checked out. I was black and blue all over. One side, there was a large bump. My arms were bruised. Everything was swollen. Luckily, the doctor forbade them to interrogate me more. For 3 weeks, they did not come. They let me lie there. While I was young, everything healed. Forgive me, like a dog. The interrogations resumed for another month. My interrogator was so cruel. Kamalov was his surname, a Russian. I never forgot him. However, he only tortured me physically, psychologically, not physically. He put me in the corner the whole day, and he would talk and talk and talk. That's one image. Stefan Prakovich. My friend and I had just arrived home from a trip. They were ready, waiting for us. The two of us were arrested together in our native village. A scarf was thrown over my head and I was bundled into a car. 3 people were already lying there. The scarf was only removed when I was brought into the holding cell. Through a small window, I saw the others who shared in my misfortune. I did not manage to see everyone. The NKVD, which is the FSB or the KGB then, workers tortured us for 6 months. They beat us horribly. It was very frightening during the first days. They demanded that I admit to everything and give the names of other people. I was tortured. I was severely tortured. The main thing was that when I was being tortured, a woman and a girl on the other side of the wall was being tortured as well. It was impossible to listen to their shouts. It was awful. I didn't have the strength to endure it. They beat me, coming at me from every side. I would double over to evade the blows and would hit me in the solar plex. There was a bucket of cold water they threw over me and beat me, and the torture was terrifying. Then I was brought to the administrative camp. Here I was sentenced. This happened in 1950. I was given 25 years plus 5 years loss of civil and political rights. 3 of my comrades the 3 that came were executed. So he was lucky to even survive. Here's another experience, one in the camp. We were taken to cut wood in the dead of winter. We were housed in tents. The temperatures dropped to -58 degrees. And we were housed in tents. In the middle of the tent stood 2 small stoves. Instead of the stove, you had to stoke them. As long as you stoked them, it was warm. When it burned out, it was cold inside the tent. We came back from cutting lumber, barely alive. We couldn't sit down. We had to stoke the barrels just to stay alive. The bunks were thrown together, roughed branches from larch trees. There's trees in the area. The twigs had been cut particularly well, nor were given any sort of mattress or bedding. So they basically Bratislava who first came to Magadan were sent up the Kalama, which is the city outside of Magadan, or the road outside of Magadan, and said the faster you build your hut, the more of you will survive. And many died just in the first few days of the prison camp, their experience at prison camp. So these are some of the stories. The reality of the prison camp life was extremely harsh. The food was minimal, and the clothing was minimal. Many of the people died from exposure. They would be able to stop work or work with this community if there was less than, the temperature would drop less than 58, minus 58, then they could stop working. Now, can you imagine? Magadan now is, we have winter time at minus 30, and I have equipment and clothes to protect me. I wouldn't understand what would be minus 58. We had, there's a small museum in Magadan to show the kind of clothes that they were given to wear, and it was minimal. So the gift of this was to meet these men and women who suffered for their faith. In my priesthood, I never would have imagined myself being able to give communion to somebody who had so extensively suffered for being a believing Catholic. As we gathered more and more, I realized that we needed to honor them. Now, at that time in 1994, the city was very, well, you might say, they had still a very strong stigma. They were still political prisoners. Many of them had not been rehabilitated, which means their passports still had the stamp. And so we started the process of rehabilitating and working with them to get their paperwork so that they could and actually get, some stipend for the time in which they served in the prison camp. So they would give some money, but very little, of course. And the city itself was very suspicious of this work, and suspicious of me, I suspect. Little by little, what happened, as we would gather, at the end of every month, we'd have these lovely men and women. I call them my sakrovishe, my treasures. And I would invite a small group. The city has some incredible choirs or orchestras, or people that would put on plays, and every time they would come, they would meet these incredible men and women. And so I saw one of the amazing things is a culture change from 1994, where they were seen as political prisoners and untouchable. In the last 15 years, they became, there's a line of people who want to come to our meetings now to meet them and to perform for them. So they became heroes, and at the time as well we petitioned, and there became an official day for them to celebrate October 31st, which is the day of the repressed. And there's a gathering in the city, the mayor comes, the governor comes, and so there's actually an amazing cultural change from our work with the oppressed, besides our own internal change. So that is my my own personal greatest experience to see how faith survived, and then from there a foundation of faith is being renewed in the parish itself. Other things we do in Russia, and especially in Magadan, you know that Russia has, if you hate God, you hate creation, and so the Soviet system was a system against life, basically against family, and so the abortion rate in Russia and to this day is very, 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 very high. For every 10 births, there's every 13 births, there's 10 abortions, so the abortion rate is extremely high. So when I came, I realized that this is an area that had to be worked with, and so we did two things. We started a program for mothers, young mothers that were pregnant, that would offer them an option rather than abortion. Abortion would be supported in prayer, material and spiritual, and also healing for those women who had abortions. There's a Rachel's Vineyard. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's a Rachel's Vineyard. We had it translated into Russian. Teresa Burke is a good friend of mine, and we had a woman who ran it in Alaska come, and we now have experienced a tremendous growth where we have in 5 parishes at least one retreat a year, maybe 2 retreats a year, healing retreats for women. And to give you a sense of the direness and the need of this retreat, on the first Rachel's Vineyard retreat, there's a time in which the women who had the abortions as part of the healing process to name the children, and to give those children back to God. And so in Russia, you love candles, so there's this bowl with water, and you light the candles, and you put the candles, and there were 4 women aboard on this, 5 women on this retreat, and we had 47 candles in terms of the amount of abortions there. So it's, on average, would be 10 abortions, would not be high in Russia. So you can see the devastation in the people's lives, and so the need for this healing. The gift of that, of course, is that then these women experience some level of healing and become witnesses. So there's a movement called Silent No More, where women speak about their experience of abortion. So we have, maybe not publicly as much, but we have a women's group that comes together on a Thursday and shares their experience with other women. And so there's this lovely ministry to each other that's happening as well. And then we have this group of women, mothers groups, mothers and children's, that we have been, I think probably 10 years already. Just one story I'll tell you. It actually is somebody who was working with us, working with me, who's Chukchi, a native, and his wife was Buryatki. And they had a second child. She was pregnant with a second child. And oftentimes in Russia, the medical system is so primitive. And so they had just come into the church, and Galia came to me and said she'd been to the doctor, and the blood test showed that there was a problem with the child, probably hydrocephalic or mongoloid. And so she said the doctor had scheduled an abortion for Monday, which was a Friday. And she said, well, of course, I just came Catholic. What do I do? I said, well, of course you don't. We don't do abortion, of course. And Volodya heard about it, ran back from his work, came to the church, and I said, well, Volodya, what are you going to do? He says, well, it's my son. However this child is born, whatever condition, it's my son. So I said, okay, let's do this. Let's go to confession. Let's celebrate the Eucharist. Let's pray. And so we did that in the weekend, and then Monday morning came, and the blood test was normal, and the child was born, and they named the child Misha, for my name is Michael. And the child was born with a very large head. But as I looked around, I said, Volodya, you have a very large head. So this is just carrying on tradition. So oftentimes the reality is the Russian response is abortion. And so these stories of women and how they fight to have and to hold on to their child is quite courageous. We have a number of witnesses, these women as well. So, I think, and maybe if you have some questions about our ministry there, or is your Orthodox, or your fathers have some reflection about the faith here, the church here that's growing? And if not, then we can, your reception showed this little video.
Father, you mentioned the women and pregnant and so forth. Are there fathers, or are there marriages? Are there fathers? You mentioned the one father, but I mean, are most of these women married?
This is usually what happens. Many of the women are natives, which are from up in the area of Magadan. We have Yeveni, Venki, Buryatki, Chukchi, which are native population. Fairly naive because they live in villages. They come to Magadan, either get an education or look for work. They find a Russian man who promises everything if they just move in. And move in, they become pregnant, and then the man says, usually, if you don't have abortion, you have to leave. And so they are either on the streets or back to their relatives, and either have the abortion to stay with the man or they leave. So it's not a marriage, it's a relationship. And much pressure is given to have the abortion because they don't want the responsibility of this child. And that's not only from the men. We had a woman who was pregnant with twins. And the grandmother, she had already had 2 children. The grandmother says, how can we support 4 children? So the grandmother tried to talk her in, and she was married, tried to talk her in to have the abortion. And so, and one of the excuses was that we don't have in Magadan a baby carriage big enough for 2. So I ordered 2 baby carriages big enough for 2. And the next person that came to us was pregnant with twins. So we had 2 baby carriages ready. And when the twins were born, the grandmother came and was weeping, thanking us that we had helped support and to save these children. It was a very powerful witness. And so the experience is regretful because the culture is anti-life in that respect, and the lack of response of, I must say, many of them, the young men would rather not have the child. So the women are left, and so we even have, without a place to stay. So we have to find a place for them to stay and then care for them. We promise a year to 3 years of support. Anybody that comes. If you want to hold a baby.
What type of work do people do there?
Magadan is still very much based in the natural resources, so there's gold. They've just opened up, they've just sought and found an oil field, coal, fishing industry. There's government. It's called the obelisk, or it's the larger kind of county, I guess. They're larger than that county. So all the government offices there. The largest, besides the university, a small university, but the largest group of hired people are still at KGB in Magadan. They have a huge building because they have Americans like us to look after. So they have to have so the government is still the largest employer. And so, yes?
Our relationship at St. Monica's with our neighbors in the Holy Virgin Cathedral, the Orthodox Church down the street, Church in Exile, have not been as warm as we would want them to be. How do you relate to the Russian Orthodox Church in Magadan?
Well, that's a very good question. I probably should have spoken that up right up front because, first of all, the Catholic is a minority church in a culture of orthodoxy. And so there's a level of humility. That's the first step. We have to be humble in this, in Russia, and know who we are in the Russian community, in the Orthodox community. And yet, as a pastor, I have a role to take care of Catholics and those who are seeking God. A third of my parish are Catholic backgrounds, Catholic roots. A third of my parish are non-believers that walk in from the door, and a third of my parish are baptized, non-practicing, either Protestants, maybe practicing Protestant, or not practicing Orthodox. And each person is given a formation time, a choice. The Orthodox Usually in Russia, there's a kind of a political, overarching relationship. Probably in the same sense here. There's a political overarching relationship with Orthodoxy and Catholicism, and that's lived out. Changed considerably from the late 90s to the present, much warmer, much more open, thanks to Pope Benedict. He offered a tremendous change in relationship. He was greatly respected. His writings were published more than John Paul in Russia, more understood, maybe because of John Paul was more philosophic, and Benedict was more pastoral, and theological but pastoral. But on the individual level is where relationships can warm or stay cool. Not publicly. Now, for instance, when my bishop comes to do confirmation, the Orthodox bishop invites him into his curia, and we have dinner together. And they, as two bishops, complain they don't have enough seminarians. After a bottle of wine, they start talking even more serious. So there's a lovely relationship individually. And that's always been the case. Any decision I would make, when I built my church, I went to the Orthodox bishop and said, this is what I'm doing. So there's no secret. So my pastoral activity is open, so he knows. I feel that's obligation to that. I look on him as a bishop for me as well. And so I've had 5 bishops in Magadan, 3 very positive and 2 very much against me. But so I think, first of all, on a theological level, there is a tremendous dialogue with the Orthodox at this time, and the patron ministry theologians in Rome right now. So that dialogue is happening on that level. But on the individual level, I think it's just through the bishop. Every bishop has a sense of relationship. I'm not sure what your bishop here is like, but yeah. It's a heartbreak, it's a heartbreak in one level. Another level, it's understandable because I know when my sister, my blood sister, offends me, or I have an argument, it hurts more than if you would say a terrible thing. And we're sisters and brothers so close that whatever historical roots of antagonism are hard to overlook. So I pray like John Paul with 2 lungs. I have in my heart the unity of the church. And I pray that in my own heart. Yes?
It's a 2-part question. Were a lot of the Christians that you know in the Gulags, were they in prison for being Christians? And then the second part is, did you find people that came to the faith well in the Gulags?
Yeah. Most of them were Catholic. I mean, the prisoners I ministered to, we called them repressed. Were they arrested because they were Catholic? Some of them, like Branislava, had a St. Anthony prayer group, and he was arrested during that, and they found this supposedly anti-government material. There were political prisoners in Catholic countries, and they were treated poorly because they were believers. So they were the least in the prison camps. The prison camps had also thieves and murderers, and they were the top of the rung. So the political prisoners, like the believers, were persecuted the strongest for their believing, for their faith. So were they arrested because they believed in God? No, they were arrested to fulfill a quota, but they were arrested to also strip the Baltic countries of a believing community. The Catholic communities are very strong.
And the second
Came to the faith, yeah. Suffering can do 2 things. It can make you very bitter, or it can bring out a deep renewal or a deep call to God. And I think that both of those realities you can find in the prison camps. I have no specific stories, because the people that I interviewed were all Catholic beforehand, and deep faith people, and their faith grew in that suffering. So that would be the image I have. Whether that somebody came to faith in prison from their evangelization, I'm sure there were. Because you had to hang on to something. When you're suffering, you have to hang on to something. And I'm sure that would, like Branislava would catechize with the rosary. And I'm sure that would give faith to somebody to continue. Stefan, he was a lovely man. He died 2 years ago. I talked about how he would help especially young women who were just frightened. And he would take them aside and he would do their work because physically they couldn't do it. He would do their work for them. And that witness of Christian charity, I'm sure, would change people's lives. So many of them were believers already. The political prisoners were already believers. Yeah. Okay. Yes?
It seems I heard that the Orthodox clergy are upset about all these other religions coming into Russia, and they want to crack down on that. Not necessarily Catholic, but
Yeah.
Jehovah's Witnesses. And
I think that's true. I think that's correct. I think they have a sense that there's they call it canonical right. Russia is a canonical right to be Orthodox, and there's a general mindset. If you're born Russian, you're born Orthodox. So to choose another faith is a kind of a betrayal of your Russian heritage. Charismatic churches, evangelical churches, but they were also Adventist churches. They were there during the Revolution. Baptist churches have a long history in Russia. Adventists as well have long evangelical, charismatic churches. There's a pastor in Magadan. When I came in 1989, we had a gathering. Very naive again, you know, us Americans, we have just blinders on, you know. Let's go, I said, my bishop said, well, let's build an ecumenical center in Magadan. We had no idea what he was doing, so we sat at a table, and here was an Adventist pastor, and here was a Pentecostal pastor, and here was the administrator of the Commission of Religious Organizations. And the bishop said, well, can we build this ecumenical center? And the pastor said, well, last week he locked my church up. I'm not sure I want to talk to him. So the government before perestroika was very evident against the churches. And the Orthodox then have taken on a role as well as limiting and being against other churches growing in Russia. Charismatic churches are strong in Russia. Evangelical churches are strong. Some of my best friends, pastors. I have a gathering in Magadan. I gather the pastors together, and my Orthodox brothers don't join me. There's 7 pastors, and we celebrated Pro-Life Sunday together. And I was sitting. I remember this. There was a very fundamentalist Baptist, Pentecostal, Adventist, all in a Catholic church, you know. And I said, this is the Holy Spirit, because we're pro-life together. And so, but there are, like, there's churches, the pastors I know that are still strongly persecuted. And there, I think I would consider myself not persecuted, but we really are where there's interruption in our life, you know, by the government. So it's not persecution, but they surely like to bother us to this day. So, yes.
When we had visited Russia a couple of times.
Where did you visit?
Well, Moscow, St. Petersburg, but we visited during the communist era, and it was Leningrad, and it went to the north of Baltic Sea, and then the second time around it was down to St. Petersburg. But most of the churches were museums.
Oh yeah, or museums or archives.
Yeah.
In our diocese, there were 5 Catholic churches, and all but 2 have been given back to us. So, yeah, they used the churches for various organ halls. That was the big thing. And so, and the government has laws on the books that the churches have to be returned. But again, that's Russian laws that's on the books have lived in two different realities. So it's surprising that how many Catholic churches were in Russia. I think people don't understand. Again, in Vladivostok before the revolution, there were 5,000. There was parishes of 5,000 people. Vladivostok Catholics, many of them Polish descent. But it's amazing. Yeah.
Are you going to be visiting other cities?
I'm going to Sacramento, and what I need to do is what I'm doing is for the mission. I just do preaching and retreats, and so I go to a parish and I do the Sunday homily with some reflection, and then afterwards meet with people, or I give retreats. So I'll be doing some retreats. I'll be going to actually preaching in Ireland and Scotland on the way back. So Sacramento, Alaska, Washington D.C., Ireland and Scotland, back to Magadan. So, yeah.
I was in a dinner during Great Lent with some that included a couple of clergy from Holy Virgin. And one of them said that, who's Russian himself, said that Stalin is being rehabilitated now in Russia. I wonder if you could comment on that.
I think that there's rewriting history is a gift for Russia, and there are there's a gentleman in this book who talks about his prison time, and he deserved it because Stalin was always right, and there are those people that have that, but generally I would think not. I think generally not. The history of Stalin and his horrible evil. They estimate 24 million came through the camps, were exiled. How many died, we don't know. There's still archives are still not open. So.
You know, Father, over the years, with the number of years we've been, this Our Lady of Fatima Byzantine Catholic, there were some Russian Catholics from Russia, born in Russia, and they would come here. We had Yevgeny,
Sure.
Allah, and it was a great, place, oasis for them, because they could identify with their traditions and all, and they really would find people, elsewhere now, move, jobs, send them elsewhere.
Sure.
This is a parish of many, many visiting people. So
Yeah. Well, you have a priest now, and I think that makes for... there's two things that you need for a Russian.
Yes.
Храм и священник. Church and priest. I'm serious. We tried, we had an apartment, it was never recognized.
No.
Once you build a church, it was a church.
Yeah.
A chram. And so you have, I think, a really strong... There's a lot of hope, It's a lovely little chapel.
This is political, but now how do you like Putin?
Putin.
Putin.
I'm becoming very Russian, I think. So much corruption. You need somebody with strong hands. And he's strong. And there's governors that were just destroying areas that were becoming czars, and they were just, like our particular governor who was assassinated, actually, was stealing from the people so much that he's put a limit to some of that. So a Russian would love Putin. Generally, they were very, very supportive. We Americans have individual rights as the first principle of our life, and it's gone absurd. We're absurdly individualistic, absurdly individual. Russians have more Eastern mentality, collective right. So it's better to feel a part of something and what I would sacrifice some of my personal rights to have a collective sense. And Russia lost a collective mentality when communism fell because it was an identity. And so they searched for something very quickly, and the Orthodox Church filled something of that. The Russian nationalists grew very strongly, and Putin, who came after Yeltsin, was an alcoholic and a scandal for Russians, became a leader of some strength and some prestige. And so There is obviously a strong movement against him, strong in the sense that there's a number of people, but that's pretty much crushed at this point. And there is, for us in Russia, there's some limited freedoms that were there. All the government owns all the government owns all the newspapers and the television stations. So at this time, there is not much free press, you know. So there's sacrifices, you know. But and he's going to be around for a while. It'll be another 12 years.
And he doesn't like the United States.
No, actually, yeah. I think, you know, again, we make a big mistake. You speak with a Russian with strength. You don't speak with a Russian with weakness. You have to show strength. I remember the first time I realized I had started to have a Russian soul. I was coming back from Irkutsk on a very tired meeting, and a plane was filled with Russians. I was the only American. I had my habit. And there was one seat open, and then the rest were in the, one seat was in the back, and at that time Russians were smoking on the airplane. As the stewardess was saying, there's no smoking, people were going back to the toilets and smoking. And this was just typically Russian. So I knew if I'd be in that back seat, I would smell smoke the whole way back 4.5 hours to Magadan. So the seat was in front. There was a man had put his shuba. The shuba is a long fur coat. And he was a very wealthy man. And I said, "Is the seat taken?" He says, "Yes, my coat is on the seat." So I'm standing there now. Most Americans would go, "Oh, back to the bus." Well, there's something inside me that says, "No." The seat is for a human being and not for a coat, so I'll take the seat. "No, you won't. This seat has my coat." Now, the Russian airlines, the people are getting very quiet because they're seeing this American raise his voice. And so pretty soon, we were having this argument about this coat. And nobody could quite understand